I will try to fix you.
The Far Cry series is a classic example of trying to have too much of a good thing, where you can still have heaps of fun and it still feels worn out. Ever since Far Cry 3, Ubisoft has been pursuing that sweet spot of balls-to-the-wall action that the series is undoubtedly known for, but sacrificing both coherence and some creativity in the process. So, how do we improve both the series releases over the years without losing that undeniable identity that people keep identifying and saying that's a Far Cry moment, that's what Far Cry is all about? This is a pretty tough one, and I'm going to have a lot of tough opinions, but honestly, here is how I would fix the Far Cry series. This one is pretty unknown among most Far Cry fans, and was more or less just a precursor of what was to come. While I wouldn't quite say it was memorable, it kind of played out like a Hollywood movie. It did start getting the little things right early on. It definitely had that balls-to-the-wall feel. I mean, just listen to this plot. Your boat is destroyed by Black Hawk helicopters, and you swim to safety on a tropical island. You communicate with a mysterious man who reveals a secret CIA mission to defeat an evil doctor who is mutating humans in his evil lair on top of an active volcano. And sure, it does sound a little bit like something you'd see in Dr. No, Thunderball, or Octopussy, but Far Cry antagonists have always been a little bit like Bond villains, with their elaborate traps for our protagonists and their charming and unhinged tirades. The chaos was starting to thread together nicely, and this was kind of just to set things in motion. This is more or less where most people consider the true Far Cry series to begin. While I wouldn't discount Far Cry Instincts, even if it was published by Crytek and started as a sci-fi sort of adventure, it is quite apparent that Far Cry 2 started to lay the foundations of what we expected in a typical Far Cry game and adventure. The game itself has a more grounded premise, placing you, a nameless mercenary, at the heart of a civil war between two factions both claiming to be for the people. A little bit of personal trivia: when I was younger and my dream of becoming a game developer was blossoming, I was scribbling down ideas for a game I could make, and I was so impressed with this one particular idea that I kept having in my head, and I was so determined to get some feedback on the internet, and I kind of realized I wrote the plot for Far Cry 2. Go figure. It also offered more open-ended gameplay, lacking a little bit in the first Far Cry, improved visual and world design thanks to the beefed-up Dunia engine, and its antagonist, the Jackal, was also a morally grey character. This antagonist role would be regularly swapped with a much more unhinged, irredeemably evil villain, with both good and bad results. Don't know. I do kind of like the idea of having a more morally grey antagonist, rather than just going straight up white and black, good versus evil. And this is certainly one of the times I noticed this. I would say the other one is probably Pagan Min, although Pagan Min is also still really kind of unhinged and despicable. So, take your pick. Other than the Jackal itself, I must say I did enjoy Far Cry's theme and atmosphere quite a lot. This is probably the most realistic the series has ever been, if you could say that. Your gun could jam, the enemies could take over outposts after you have captured them. And I know this was done afterwards, but this was the first time we saw it in Far Cry. The constant threat of malaria, if you did not have the pills, you would instantly collapse and die and had to reload a save. It just felt like a real scenario, and I do find it interesting that this has not been attempted by the series again. It had some criticisms for general gameplay, some motives that the story didn't quite flesh out, and the artificial intelligence, but this was all being worked on after the game, and they took all that criticism to heart, they chipped away, and then they crafted, arguably, the highlight of the series. And I think you guys know which one I'm talking about. There is no doubt in my mind when I say that this is the magnum opus of not only the Far Cry series, but probably also open world first person shooters. Bold words, I know, but this entry just got so much right and took all that criticisms and shortcomings perceived from Far Cry 2, tinkered and improved them on the new Dunia 2 engine, and cranked out a timeless masterpiece. There are countless videos out there that will ring the praises for this game, and I don't want to really echo that here, but to just go briefly through them, it had superb voice acting. Superb.
No, please. You see, the thing about our loved ones, right? Our fucking loved ones! They come and they blindside you every fucking time. So they say to me, they say, Voss, who the fuck is it going to be? Them or me? Me or them? like they fucking think that I need to make a fucking choice.
Whatever your name is, it slipped my mind. How stupid do you think I am? We should keep playing. Dealer's on the left, right? Guess he's sitting this one out.
Ditching some of the realism of its predecessor and harkening back a bit to the Far Cry Instinct's Bond villains, but with a little bit more unhinged and a little less Hollywood, we got Voss and Hoyt, which still probably is the two best antagonists this game series has ever had. The world design, the game design, the dynamic encounters of both wildlife and enemies, everything felt more organic and unpredictable, and the dangers of a tropical island full of pirates and predators began to set in. The whole game felt like an acid trip. The boss fights were stylized, the action just was non-stop, and Jason Brody just goes from this man afraid to kill to a ruthless warrior telling up the bodies, and you just see it in every kind of place you look. It's either directly told to you, or you just see the tatal growing on his arm, the path to the Rakyat as he kind of progresses there, and it's just a beautiful kind of transformation, and it was glorious, and I just loved every second of it. Now, I know what I said about Far Cry 3 being the magnum opus of both the Far Cry series and open world first-person shooters, but I cannot tell a lie. Far Cry 4 is my favorite of them all. And this is just going to go against my criticisms and opinions I have of the series overall that I'll explain later on, but it's just something about this game had such charm. It gets me every single time. Ubisoft pretty much did the same thing here again. They took the criticisms of the previous game and built upon it. And while the game started to look alike slightly, I think this one and Far Cry 3 are still experiences that are different enough and unique enough to each have their own wonderful identity that they can craft. The previous one was a drug-filled adventure, but Far Cry 4 was a spiritual journey. It's about returning to your roots, it's about scattering your mother's ashes, discovering not only about your birthplace, but also about your own past. And it tackled and juggled so many beautiful themes and motives all at once, kind of effortlessly. This Far Cry is also the first that introduced the take out this person to liberate this region that the later games also adopted, but these three generals in question were more linear than what we saw later on, and also just far more nuanced characters. I think Noor was probably one of the best tragic characters that we would ever see in this series up to this point. And while the lawless paradise of Rook Islands is a sight to behold in itself, there is simply no beating that breathtaking world that is Kyrat. It is so effectively captured situations of rural, remote places in the world, far detached from our civilizations, and sometimes succumbing to the vices of people like Pagan Min, in this case. As I mentioned as well, this game did strive to fix some criticisms for Far Cry 3, and that it did so well. Overhauled fortresses and outposts, actual ways to scale mountains without falling to your death, the ability to play the entire campaign in a co-op multiplayer experience, as well as meaningful story decisions. Back in Far Cry 3, you had that one decision at the end where you could either kill your friends and be with Citra, or you could just save your friends. And did you really have another option that you would pick? In Far Cry 4, you had all these nice neat little stories, no matter how big or small, that were coming to a head all at once. And they all played out so well with each other in these sort of layers. Like we're talking about Amita and Sabal's conflict in the Golden Path, and which way you were going to lean towards. We had obviously the main story of Pagan Min, but also just the main story played about how Pagan Min has a role in your past and the history, as well as just your history, the dark of the history, the skeletons in the closet coming out. We also had the small stories, of course, of Nua and her desperation to get back to her family. We also had Yuma, who wanted to usurp Pagan Min, and her little story that played out. And just actually the main one, really, the one that grabbed my attention, the story of Kyrat itself, you know? I kind of felt this place's beauty, but also this place's kind of how much it has lost. You know, you see the people and you see them in their hopeless desperation and stuff of just they're in a hopeless situation essentially, and it's much more strongly portrayed here as, let's say, in Far Cry 3.
I'm lonely. Want to play?
Well, I would say Far Cry 3 in its raw form is the best of the bunch. Far Cry 4 is quintessentially the embodiment of the franchise in all of its chaos and all of its beauty.
I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Oh, I'm going to get flack for this one. For me, this is the first misstep in the series path. This game was slated to be so much, and looking at their back-to-back home runs with Far Cry 3 and 4, I was justifiably looking forward to it. I'll start with the good. Joseph Seed was a great antagonist. While Pagan Min was entertaining, I felt that Seed was a reincarnation of the true evil that Vars and Hoyt portrayed.
Take me into your heart! Accept me as your savior! Nail me to the fucking cross! And let me be reborn!
That opening sequence of landing the chopper in literal enemy territory, walking in ominous dread among the cultists in the church to apprehend the prophet, and for all hell to break loose the moment you set foot out of the compound was just... it was exquisite.
No one is coming to save you.
Hurry up! God has kept you under the shadow of his wings. Everything is unfolding according to God's plan.
Escape sequence is pretty fun, full of action as the Eden's Gate people stop at nothing to kill you. And then the actual game starts and it's your run-of-the-mill Far Cry. Now, you might ask, how can that possibly be a bad thing? Well, allow me to explain. You start off with the massive Montana wilderness at your mercy. You're free to explore, and you have to take down the evil cult from the inside by infiltrating their regions, taking out their region leaders, and thereby weakening Joseph Seed. There's a resistance that is disorganized, against all odds, searching for a beacon of hope to inspire them to take on the big bad, except we've seen this play out twice before now. And while Far Cry 3 and 4's identities elevated their games to a kind of place where you could enjoy them and enjoy the storytelling and just have unique experiences of both of them, I feel like 5 suffered. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a formula when it comes to your game series, and refining that formula ultimately should lead you towards continuously improving the game. Far Cry 5 just left those narrative and characters in the dust. Besides Joseph Seed's spectacular on-screen performances, I felt just absolutely nothing for the region leader characters. I didn't feel that sympathy I had for Nua, the vile I had for Buck, or even the fear and suspense I had for someone like Hoyt or Yuma. I felt nothing. They were pretty much a means to an end. And that should never be how I value the characters of your game. Especially those that are supposed to form this part of the scary, very, very scary Seed family. Apart from that, the storytelling in Far Cry 5 really took a back seat. When it comes to the improvements made from Far Cry 4, the main change was to really give the players a more open-ended approach to the narrative, allowing you to access the entire map at once and engage in the region leaders in any order you wish. Now that does sound good on paper, because which it gives the player more choice, but that means like no first completing like the South Island before you were able to infiltrate the North Island like in Far Cry 3, or first killing off Pol, then Nur, then Yuma. No, you had the freedom to do whatever you want, but by doing that, I feel like it can equally devalue your narrative. I've always been a bit of a skeptic when it comes to open world games and their care given for a narrative. Because even the most fantastic examples like The Witcher 3 or Red Dead Redemption 2, two games that I adore, still struggle with trying to make the story cohesive because of all the liberties they gave the player. And Far Cry 5 just suffers the same fate in the end, especially when it stands against the more linear Far Cry 3 and 4, on top of being not as well written as those two. And ultimately, I wonder what could have been.
Hello, and welcome to the Los Pollos Hermanos family. My name is Gustavo, but you can call me Sus.
You could make a very solid case for any of the Far Cry games, including the last two, that they are good games, and I would agree with you, genuinely. At its core, all of them possess that DNA that makes them Far Cry, in the same way that even the worst Battlefield games still possess that DNA that makes them Battlefield, and the same with Fallout and other franchises. But if we were here to discuss good games, the video would have ended a lot sooner. We are here to make good games great. Far Cry's principle when it came to its design primarily is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And while that can certainly work, it just falls to the law of diminishing returns. In my opinion, Far Cry 5 and 6 both posted excellent premises and means for the franchise to dial back into their more grounded games, similar to what Far Cry 2 had way back when, and kind of how the theme of Far Cry 4 made me feel. Cult leaders and revolutions are both real-life threats that have affected real people. For Far Cry 5, if you really want to sell me on the idea that Joseph Seed and his cult believes he is the reborn son, you have to sell me on that. Don't just give me that beautiful intro and carry on as if nothing happened. I want to see damn revelations, fire, and hell on earth. I want to see swarms and pests of Exodus coming down on the people. I want to see biblical consequences and nothing less. The cult just should have been way more of a feature. Don't tone down or shy away from what really happens in those evil, twisted organizations. You need to show it. And perhaps maybe the character we portrayed maybe should have been someone in the cult who tried to get out, and just emphasize how difficult that is, because it's genuinely something you can talk about. As for Far Cry 6, Revolution it was just so romanticized, this idea of a revolution. It's just way more grim in the real world. And for a game that was touted to be full of political themes and history, I feel like in the end it was just another watered down dictator being stopped by a rebellion. Revolutions create a lot of public unrest and endanger not only the lives of the rebels or the soldiers, but also the innocent. Again, this just wasn't hinted at that, because there was this continuous attempt to make that Far Cry formula, that Far Cry gameplay, that Far Cry feeling, and they just forgot about their identity completely. But just imagine the setting, a real-life revolution, and imagine the continuous struggle between the dictator, the rebel, and foreign forces. Look at maybe like the Brazilian special forces, masters of urban combat who would fit into the setting of Yara so perfectly. You can show us their real-life, grounded experience of how they need to survive and save lives. You can make it a damn anthology series if you like, maybe like Until Dawn or Man of Medan, where we can assume and play a lot of characters and play this role in a twisted tale, and ultimately we can determine a lot of outcomes for the game. Maybe some people die, maybe some people don't die, maybe something happens that is really consequential to the story, but then you could have this really interesting spin and warrant quite a few playthroughs because people want to see all the outcomes. Far Cry usually do that quite interesting with their endings and stuff, but you can go much further than just the endings. You can have really, really deterministic points in the game where anything can change. And I mean, you have Caveira and Capital from Rainbow Six. You could have brought them in. Hell, you could have brought in freaking Sam Fisher, since you're not making a Splinter Cell game anyway. So there's so much you could have done. And I just felt like this is always what I feel like. There's so much potential there that I see, and I just want it to be realized. But that's my rant. It's a really passionate, heartfelt one. I've had this franchise really close to my heart, and it just makes me feel disheartened to see, well, it become what I think is a shell of its former self. But again, I can't say that I really want the series to get back to its best form. And if you have any feedback, or other comments or suggestions, I'd love to hear them. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for everyone who has been supporting and watching these. And I just hopefully wish for a fantastic Far Cry 7. But until then, stay safe and goodbye.